Hello, welcome to FD Storytelling. How are you doing today? We are going to be reading a story. And before that, we are going to be doing recorder time with me. Then we are going to be doing the joke of the day with Daniel. Then we are going to be doing the Bible. And we aren't going to be doing the synopsis with Kim today. Sorry if you really wanted Kim to come out, but she can't come out right now. She's dying.
She's not dying.
I'm not feeling very good.
Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss another video. Now it's recording time for my other brother that we never talk about. Hi. I'm just joking, guys. Alright, recorder time. Mary had a little lamb. That's about the only song I know. But here we are with the joke of the day.
Boom!
Shakalaka.
Boom shakalaka.
Where did the sheep go to get a haircut?
I don't know. Where's
The barber shop.
the shop?
Guys, it's pronounced like this.
The barber
Where did the sheep go to get a haircut? The barber shop. The barber shop.
Okay. That is some craziness. Okay, I see two people. Thank you, Mom. I don't know who the other person is, but thank you for being here. We appreciate you. Okay, now I only see one person. All right.
I think they left because
So-
you said that.
Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe. hit
You already
the bell,
said
never
that.
miss another video.
You already said that. All right. So, now we're going to start Psalm 31. English Standard Version, here it is. As soon as all of my children are situated. All right. To the choir master, a psalm of David. In you, O Lord, do I take refuge. Never let me be put to shame. In your righteousness, deliver me. Incline your ear to me. Rescue me speedily. Be a rock of refuge for me, a strong fortress to save me. For you are my rock and my fortress, and for your name's sake you lead me and guide me. You take me out of the net they have hidden for me, for you are my refuge. Into your hand I commit my spirit. You have redeemed me, O Lord, faithful God. I hate those who pay regard to worthless idols, but I trust in the Lord. I will rejoice and be glad in your steadfast love, because you have seen my affliction. You have known the distress of my soul, and you have not delivered me into the hand of the enemy. You have set my foot in a broad place. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eye is wasted from grief, my soul and my body also. For my life is spent with sorrow, and my years with sighing. My strength fails because of my iniquity, and my bones waste away. Because of all my adversaries I have become a reproach, especially to my neighbors, and an object of dread to my acquaintances. Those who see me in the street flee from me. I have been forgotten like one who is dead. I have become like a broken vessel. For I hear the whispering of many, terror on every side, as they scheme together against me, as they plot to take my life. But I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hand. Rescue me from the hand of my enemies and from my persecutors. Make your face shine on your servant. Save me in your steadfast love. O Lord, let me not be put to shame, for I call upon you. Let the wicked be put to shame. Let them go silently to Sheol. Let the lying lips be mute, which speak insolently against the righteous, in pride and contempt. Oh, how abundant is your goodness, which you have stored up for those who fear you, and worked for those who take refuge in you, in the sight of the children of mankind. In the cover of your presence you hide them from the plots of men. You store them in your shelter from the strife of tongues. Blessed be the Lord, for he has wondrously shown his steadfast love to me. When I was in a besieged city, I had said in my alarm, I am cut off from your sight. But you heard the voice of my pleas for mercy when I cried to you for help. Love the Lord, all you, his saints. The Lord preserves the faithful, but abundantly repays the one who acts in pride. Be strong, and let your heart take courage, all you who wait for the Lord. Psalm 32, a Maskil of David. Blessed is the one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man against whom the Lord counts no iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit. For when I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My strength was dried up as by the heat of summer, Selah. I acknowledged my sin to you, and I did not cover my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the iniquity of my sin, Selah. Therefore let everyone who is godly offer prayer to you at a time when you may be found. Surely the rush of great waters, they shall not reach him. You are a hiding place for me. You preserve me from trouble. You surround me with shouts of deliverance. Selah. I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my eye upon you. Be not like a horse or a mule without understanding, which must be curbed with bit and bridle, or it will not stay near you. Many are the sorrows of the wicked, but steadfast love surrounds the one who trusts in the Lord. Be glad in the Lord, and rejoice, O righteous, and shout for joy, all you upright in heart. That is the end of Psalm 32. Tomorrow we will get 33 and 34. And I hope that you're enjoying the reading of God's Word. Hi, Jessica. Hi, Mom. Hi, Granny Bear. It is so good to see the three of you here. I hope that Rebecca joins us later, but if she doesn't, I know she'll catch up on YouTube. Kimberly is not feeling super special today, and so she asked me to do the synopsis in her stead today. And so basically, let me see where we started yesterday. Basically, Onesimus was looking for Philemon, and he couldn't find him. He went to the school of Tyrannus, and he didn't find him there. He went back to the house, and he didn't find him there. But the neighbor said, oh, you know what? I think he's at the hospital. So he went to the hospital, and he was there. But Paul had already gone, and Philemon was sad because he really wanted to see Paul. And then
the other guy's not dead.
And Archippus isn't dead. He's actually in the hospital, like I said. I didn't mean for that to rhyme. Then they went back to Colossae, and Archippus believes in Jesus at this point. And he repented from stealing the necklace, Kimberly said, and that's basically it. I think they got back to Colossae at the end, basically. All right, so that's where we are. I hope you enjoyed that synopsis. It's not as good as Kimberly would have done, but nonetheless, that is what we have today. So this is chapter 11. Onesimus' resolve was made more difficult by the fact that Philemon's friendship with Polemon came to an abrupt end. A few days after the party from Ephesus had arrived, Polemon came to talk business and inquire about the guilds. Philemon explained that he had not been able to join the guilds. How could he, as a Christian, take part in their feasts and eat the food offered to idols and bind himself to the brotherhood by sacrificing to gods? He talked to Polemon about Christ, and this very greatly offended the rich merchant. He left the house quickly, saying he desired no hospitality from a lunatic, and would inquire at the Laodicean medical school about a potion for brain fever. But he continued to buy Philemon's wool because it was the best in the valley. All through the hot, fruitful days, Philemon attended to his harvesting, and Epaphras remained in Colossae. Onesimus ran between the threshing floor, the winepress, the olive yards, and Archippus. But although Archippus longed for his strong young companionship more than ever, he did not need him as before. For one thing, he had learned to walk with a crutch, and was becoming quite independent, and for another, his mother and little Pascasia competed with each other to wait on him hand and foot. Also, he had started to study the Jewish scriptures and was already beginning to take his place as a preacher. For night after night, when the work of the day was finished and the dusk had fallen, the people began to arrive, stealing up from the town and in from the pastures, and a strangely assorted crowd would gather in the atrium, shepherds and reapers smelling of the flocks and the fields, tired slaves, women and little children, dignified merchants, and a group of exiled Jews. Among these were 2 or 3 keen-eyed rabbis with their Pentateuchs and scrolls of history tucked under their arms. These had been but old stories of dead men and but revered words from the past, until they had suddenly discovered Christ blazing out from every parchment. Now, night after night, they pored over them, tracing the signs of his coming, reading new living interpretations into words that had hitherto been dead. The slaves and the laborers and the mothers would soon slip out, overcome by sleep and much learning. But Philemon, Epaphras, and the rabbis would sometimes continue until the stars paled. Sounds like sunrise. There was little opposition at that time. Everyone was too busy getting in the harvests. The rabbis were excommunicated from the synagogues for teaching heresy and consorting with unclean Gentiles, but they felt drawn to unclean Gentiles and did not greatly care. Philemon was highly respected in the town and was left to do as he pleased. But from other cities where Epaphras had preached the gospel and founded small churches, there came rumors of persecution and fear of death. "The olives are in," said Epaphras to Philemon, as they sat one noonday enjoying the golden autumn sunlight. "The harvests are stored. I should like you to come with me on my trip north, and encourage and exhort our suffering brethren." "And who will care for the church here?" asked Philemon. Epaphras' gaze rested thoughtfully on Archippus, who was sitting a little way apart, struggling with his longing to go too. "I think you, Archippus, could start to undertake that ministry with the help of the rabbis," he said. "You are young, but the Lord is giving you much light." "Me?" Archippus looked up, flushed with pleasures at the older man's words. "But, Master Epaphras, I know so little yet." "The Holy Spirit shall teach you all things and bring to your remembrance what you have learned," quoted Epaphras. "These were the very words of Jesus, and you have the scriptures. Now take heed to your ministry." He smiled at the amazed boy and turned back to Philemon and Onesimus. Clearing away the meal pricked up his ears. Onesimus, clearing away the meal, pricked up his ears. "We will pass by Laodicea," he said, "for the Christians meeting in the house of Nymphas are mostly rich, prosperous, and respected, and seem to need no help. In Hierapolis they are firmly grounded in the faith. In Philadelphia they stand fast, but in Sardis they are in danger of being defiled. The streets of that city flow with gold, and the vice and loose living and shame that prevail are unbelievable. I pray God they will keep their garments white. In Thyatira they have been excluded from the trade guilds and are in deep poverty, but in Pergamus and Smyrna, where Caesar is worshipped and the sacrifice to Nero is compulsory, they are in daily danger of losing their lives. Yes, I must be off. I should like to start tomorrow at daybreak. So next day the two men started off together down the valley, staves in hand, their bundles on their backs, without slaves or attendants, and Apphia and Archippus took over the direction of the household. Onesimus, in the meantime, began to scheme and plan for a day's escape at whatever cost, when suddenly fate played into his hands. Pascasia had been playing out in the field, picking berries in the hedges, and had rubbed her eyes with some poisonous juice. She came in crying, her eyes sore and inflamed, and by evening she could hardly see. Apphia was deeply anxious. Hermes must go over to Laodicea early tomorrow morning, she said, and buy some of the Laodicean eye salve. Go and tell him to start before daybreak, Onesimus, and give him the money. Onesimus stopped outside the house to consider. He had wild thoughts of attacking Hermes, tripping him up, or knocking him senseless, but after a moment or two he had decided that persuasion was better than force. He darted home and took the smallest of his precious coins from its hiding place and sought out Hermes, who was busy cleaning the stables. Hermes, he began, holding out the coin, look what I will give you to be ill tomorrow. Hermes stared at him, and his rather stupid mouth fell open. Then he stared at the coin. Where did you get that from? He asked suspiciously. Never you mind. I earned it at Ephesus. It will buy you a basin of honey to make you fatter, Hermes. But you've got to be too ill to go to Laodicea tomorrow. I want to go instead. Hermes stared doubtfully at the impudent young cockerel, hopping about, impatient at the older man's stupidity. Hermes was fat and lazy, and hated being sent to Laodicea. Besides, he had not possessed a coin for years, but he was not sure that he knew how to be ill, for he had never been ill in his life. Scream, Hermes, urged Onesimus. Vomit. Say you've overeaten and groan as loud as you can. They'll all believe that. By the time they discover the truth, I shall be halfway down the hill. And I shall be beaten, muttered Hermes, but the sight of the coin was so attractive, and the prospect of a 20-mile walk so unattractive, that he agreed to the plan without much more ado. Besides, he suddenly remembered that Philemon was away, and Apphia disliked beatings. Onesimus took no chances. He started off in the dark, long before sunrise, while the household was still asleep, merely leaving a message that, as Hermes had been very ill in the night, Onesimus had gone instead. He could hardly believe his good fortune as he dipped down over the edge of the first plain, and the farm disappeared from view. He was safe and away, and no one could stop him now. He leapt and sang like a young mad thing, for was he not free for a whole day, and was he not going to see the child of the canyons? In his elation, he never even considered the possibility of failure, or the extreme unlikelihood of a slave managing to speak with a high-born, carefully guarded little lady like Irene. Nothing could fail today. The sun rose as he crossed the lower plateau, but the season of burning heat was over, and its rays warmed and cheered him. All around him were golds and silvers, deep gold poplars and walnut trees, and pale gold empty cornfields and their stubble, and baked earth, silver and stripped olive trees, and, silver in the sunlight, the river below him. The miles seemed to be rolling away, and it was still fresh morning when he reached the gates of Laodicea and passed inside its fortifications. It seemed to him an enormous, magnificent city, almost an equal with Ephesus, and certainly Laodicea was a fine city. Destroyed by an earthquake 40 years before, it had been rebuilt in modern style with wide streets, 3 fine new theaters, and a gymnasium. It was the seat of all banking arrangements for Asia, and notoriously wealthy, for it was also the center for the wool industry and the clothes and fabrics woven in Laodicean factories were exported all over the empire. Onesimus went straight to the apothecary, sorry, I'll learn how to talk, to the pharmacy, right, who lived in the shadow of the great medical school and bought a box of the tempera phrygia, the world-famous eye powder of Laodicea. Then, his errand accomplished, he started off to find Irene's home. This was not difficult. The weavers in the cloth factories all knew Polemon, and one pointed out his great marble mansion up on the hill by the Hierapolis gate. Only when he reached the outer portals and saw the beautiful house, enclosed in an acre of garden, did he begin to realize how foolish he had been to imagine he could ever reach her. But he could not. He would not give up. If he could just get a little nearer to the house, a bold idea struck him, and he marched up to the door with his head held high. Master Philemon of Colossae sends greetings to Master Polemon of Laodicea, he announced firmly to the slave at the portal, and begs to inform him that the next bale of wool will soon be dispatched. He would also have news of his health and the health of his daughter, the Mistress Irene. Tell him, said the slave, that Master Polemon has ridden to Thyatira to buy purple dye, but he will be back in 2 days' time. He and his daughter both prosper and are in good health. Well, there was nothing to do now but to turn around and go away. But if Polemon was not at home, he could take his time. He wandered slowly toward the gate, looking back over his shoulder at the great house, and then suddenly, as he glanced toward the garden, he saw her, crouching on the ground under a mulberry tree, gathering mulberries into a basket. As before, he saw her a full minute before she saw him, and he noticed that she had changed very little. She was still slender, although probably taller, and her dark hair still fell loose about her face and shoulders. But there was a grave, lonely air about her, and when she stood up to reach the great twisted bough, she looked strangely small and fragile. All his shyness left him. He threw caution to the winds and sped over the grass toward her. She looked up quickly, and all her gravity disappeared. She knew him instantly, and her face dimpled into a delightful smile. "Have you forgotten me, Mistress Irene?" he asked her. How could she ever forget him? Had he not been the hero of the one and only adventure she'd ever had in her dull, lonely little life? Since the death of her mother, the days had been all exactly alike, the correct program of meals, lessons, embroidery, and well-protected walk or an hour's play in the garden. But at night, when she lay in bed and had bidden her correct nurse a correct good night, and had said what she was expected to say to her father, her thoughts would fly back to the canyon at Colossae, and, half asleep and half awake, she would go climbing on with the boy to where flowers of unimaginable beauty bent their heads to bright streams. Sometimes the path was too steep for her or the boulders too high, and then the boy would give her his hand and help her, and it was always more beautiful further on. They never got to the top, not even in her dreams, but one day, together, they would look over the other side. So she studied, and did as she was told, and stayed where she should, and everyone called her a good, obedient little maid. But her spirit lived in another country, where the streams were cold, and the rocks were high, and the snows not far away, and no one had ever followed her there except the boy who was always with her. And here he was again. And she was not dreaming. He was taller and thinner, his face a little more angular, but not really changed. He was looking at her in just the same way, with the same merry light of adventure in his eyes. To her, it did not matter at all that he was a slave, but she knew that other people did not share her opinions, and she looked anxiously toward the house. "Come to the herb garden," she said quickly, taking his hand just as she had taken it in the canyon. "Down there, behind these cypress trees, no one can see us, and if my governess comes, you can get behind the bushes." They sat down together among the sweet-smelling herbs and shrubs, where the sun was hot and golden, and the bees hummed in and out of the bushes and smiled delightedly at each other. "Do you remember that deep pool where you found me?" she asked, as though it had happened yesterday. "And do you remember how cross my nurse was, how my father sent her away because she let me get lost? And I was glad, because she was never kind to me. Now I have a governess, and that is much better. She does not care much what I do, as long as I finish my lessons and stay in the garden." "I had hoped you would come over to Colossae again," said Onesimus, "and we might have escaped up the canyon. Do you remember how that slave of yours hit me? It was well worth it." "We shall not come again," said Irene, suddenly grown grave and thoughtful. "My father would not take me the last time he went there, because I had run away that day, and he came back very angry indeed. He said your master had become a Christian, and he thought he must have lost his senses. I heard him telling Master Molossus, his chief weaver, about it. Onesimus, have you become a Christian? Are you all Christians?" "Not I," said Onesimus. "I want to have nothing to do with it. It seems a weak sort of religion to me, forgiving your enemies and being content with your lot. I want to fight and revenge wrong, and I want to save up and be a free man when I am older." His eyes were flashing, and she looked at him, puzzled. Then she said hesitantly, "But it makes people so kind." "My father does not know, but we have an old shepherd who is a Christian. He worships with the people who collect in Master Nymphas' house. He and his wife live in a cottage not far from the Syrian gate, where the pastures slope down to the river, and he tends my father's flock. Sometimes on my walks with Claudia, my slave, we go there. Claudia likes to look at the shops, so she leaves me in the cottage with old Ephron and Antonia, or maybe it's Euphron and Antonia. They are different from other people. They are so kind, and Antonia tells me stories about their God, Christ, how he touched a terrible leper and healed him, and took a dead girl by the hand, and she lived and called the children to him when everyone else was bidding them be gone." "Irene," said Onesimus, half teasing, "I believe you are almost a Christian yourself." "No," said Irene slowly. "My father would not allow me to be one. He would be angry if I even spoke of it. And yet, when I hear about this Christ, sometimes I feel that I love him. Did Artemis or Cybele or our own god of healing, Asclepius, ever say, 'Let the children come to me'? I think only Christ ever said that." The bright color had flooded her cheeks as she spoke, for she had never told anyone else these thoughts, and Onesimus knew she was showing him her inmost lonely heart. He sat very still, hardly daring to move or speak, lest he should spoil this clear moment of truth and perfect understanding. If it lasted, perhaps he too would show her all that was in his heart. "Mistress Irene! Mistress Irene!" She jumped up and peered round the bushes, and he crouched low. Then she turned back. "It is all right," she said. "Claudia is walking the other way. She will not come here, but I must go. Wait till I am in the house, and then run behind those cypress trees to the gate. You can slip out quite easily." Then she hesitated. "How did you say good-bye to the boy who was always there in your own country at the top of the canyons?" Suddenly the light of a happy memory broke across her face. "We shall meet again," she said. "Do you remember? We said that last time. And we have." "Of course I remember," replied Onesimus. "How could I ever forget? Ye gods, wasn't your nurse cross?" They both laughed, and she tossed back her hair and turned to run across the lawn. "Peace, peace, little Mistress Irene," he called softly after her. "One day we shall most certainly meet again." And this is probably, I don't know if it is or not. Maybe that's the picture of that meeting on the cover of the book.
Yeah, definitely.
So that is definitely the two of them talking. Although in the picture, I think the girl looks older than the boy, and the boy in the story is older than the girl. Tell me what you think in the comments below. I'm interested in your opinion. Anyway, we are going to continue on with chapter 12. All right. It was already winter before Epaphras and Philemon returned, full of joy and praise, and yearning to set out again as soon as possible, and preached Christ where he had never been named. But although Archippus and the rabbis had held the little church together, they were all missing their two fathers in Christ, and throughout the winter more and more turned from idols to serve the living God. And in a number of large households many of the slaves adopted their master's faith, and amongst them Onesimus' mother. Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Onesimus won't be happy about that.
Amongst them Onesimus' mother. Born into slavery, she was content to be wholly possessed by Apphia, body, soul, and spirit. Life had dealt harshly with her, for her parents had belonged to a drunken brute of a master, in whose household floggings and brandings were the order of the day, and as a child she had watched the crucifixion of a runaway slave. She had lost her 3 eldest children through starvation and bad treatment, and her adored husband had died as a result of a flogging. But at long last she had reached a kind mistress. Are we good?
Yes, what?
She had lost her 3 eldest children through starvation and bad treatment, and her adored husband had died as a result of a flogging. But at long last she had reached a kind mistress, and she was only too willing to follow her into this new path of peace. Not that it made much difference to her behavior, for she had long ago learned the obedience and submission required of her, but it made a great difference to her peace of mind, for it dispelled her terrible fear of death and of an unknown future. "Come unto me, and I will give you rest," was all that Nerissa asked of any religion, and in Christ she found it. But with the first signs of spring, when the snow melted on the Taurus range, and the passes opened, and the boundaries of the world receded, a letter arrived from the elders in Ephesus, containing greetings to the churches and news of Paul. He was traveling up from Greece to Macedonia, intending to sail to Syria and keep the feast of Pentecost in Jerusalem. He had sent a message to his dear Ephesian friends. His ship would be stopping at Miletus, about 20 miles south of Ephesus. Would they come over and meet him? Philemon read the letter aloud to his household and looked up at the end to find Archippus kneeling in front of him, tense with anxiety. "Father, will you take me? Will you not? You will take me, will you not? There is still time. Do you remember how you hoped he would lay his hands on me and heal me? A man lame from birth was healed in the name of Jesus by Peter and John in Jerusalem, and another at the hands of Paul in Lystra. Then why not me, Father? Is the name any less powerful for me than it was for them? Oh, Father, let us start off at once, lest we be too late." "Let us all go," said Apphia. "Pascasia is pale after the winter, and the sea air will do her good, and I should dearly love to see the great apostle. You can leave Glaucus, the bailiff, in charge of the lambing and the spring sowing as you did before. He seems trustworthy and careful, and since he too has turned to Christ, we can count on him as a brother." Philemon hesitated. He found it hard to believe that his dear son, who dragged himself round so painfully on a crutch, could ever again be the proud, splendid creature of former years, and he struggled against his own lack of faith. Surely with God all things were possible, and if at Lystra, why not at Miletus? He would travel to the end of the earth to seek healing for Archippus. But what if he was to be disappointed? There were many cripples in Ephesus. "Father, Father," pleaded Archippus, "let us make ready at once. He will travel fast, and we might be late." So they made ready and set off 4 days later, Archippus managing to hold his excitement in check. Onesimus, much to his annoyance, was not included in the party, although his mother went to attend on Apphia and Pascasia. "We shall soon be back," said Archippus as he bade Onesimus goodbye. "I wish you were coming, but you are too valuable on the farm. Just think, I shall probably come back as straight as you are and go with my father when he visits the northern churches again. Why do you look like that, Onesimus? Is not the power of Christ the same as when he walked this earth? And did any go to him in vain? Onesimus, if I am healed, will you then believe in Jesus Christ?" But the slave would make no promises. Queer things had happened in Ephesus, and Archippus might well be healed. He might even, against his will, be forced to believe with his mind, but he would never turn to commit himself to the demands of this Christ. The price was too high. The bailiff was an old trusted slave who had recently professed to become a Christian. He was a clever farmer and kept all in good order, but he lacked Philemon's tact and experience in dealing with slaves, and he had always been somewhat jealous of Onesimus. Now, with the boy completely in his power, he bullied and drove him from early morning till late at night, threatening him with the fire of darkness if he ever showed signs of fatigue. Gradually, a bitter feud grew up between them, carried on the one side by continual scolding and oppression, and on the other by sullen silence, deliberate misunderstanding of orders, and probably worse. Glaucus could never prove who put salt in his wine, or lizards in his wallet, or who laid a large boulder outside his house, so that he fell headlong over it when he went home in the dark. But he had shrewd suspicions. "I cannot abide by that man," said Erastus, a keen young slave of about 20 years old, as he and Onesimus sat over their dinner one day, "always mouthing and eating and drinking and consigning everyone else to perdition. That sort is enough to prevent anyone intelligent from turning." "I thought you had turned yourself, and he was your brother in Christ," replied Onesimus sarcastically. "That alone would stop me from becoming a Christian. Brother indeed! I'll put wormwood in his pottage tonight." He spat as far and as hard as he could. Erastus laughed. "There is Christianity and Christianity," he said, "and we do not all accept this teaching that Christ only is the end of it all. It is too easy and simple, and it does away with all our old cultures and mysteries. By keeping our fasts and festivals and mortifying our bodies, we can begin to know not only Christ and the Holy Spirit, but the principalities and powers, the thrones and dominions. There is a clever young Phrygian who has invited us to his home tonight to instruct us further, and I think you would find his teaching much more to your taste than this theory that Christ is the beginning and end of all things. It admits of some progress and scope for our intellects. All the young slaves are going. Will you come?" "Not I," said Onesimus shortly. "All this talk wearies me, and, besides, I should fall asleep, and Glaucus would be kicking my empty bed to wake me before I was in it. He just cannot bear the thought of my getting any rest. He will suspect I am resting now, so I had better go." But as he walked back to the house, a vague idea entered his mind. Only an idea at first, but he soon found it growing into a definite plan, and by the time he reached the door he had every detail arranged. All the younger slaves were going to the Phrygian's house after dark, and he would start with them. The old slaves would sleep, and the bailiff would go to his house. Philemon's house would be guarded by large fierce dogs, every one of which was his personal friend, known since their puppyhood. It might be possible. There was a stable window that opened on to the wall of the atrium where you could catch hold of the vine branch. He had never tried, but it might be possible. There was a new moon tonight, and it would be pitch dark down there behind the stables. The old slave slept very soundly, not that there was much that he could steal, because all Philemon's wealth was in the Laodicean bank. But to Onesimus every tiny prize that he could store away was a step toward his goal. There was a box in Appheia's room where Pascasia kept her little trinkets, a few gold and silver bangles, some small necklaces and earrings. She did not often wear them now, for the Christians discouraged their womenfolk from adorning themselves, and a little girl like that would hardly remember how many she had. She would probably not even notice if one or two were missing, and later on, somewhere, they would fetch a small price. Glaucus stood over him, growling and grumbling, as he swept out the courtyards and carried out the dirty straw from the stables. But the spring twilight fell at last, and the slaves came in from the fields and ate their supper quickly, impatient to be off. "Where are you all going tonight?" asked Glaucus suddenly. "Down to Alexander's house," said Erastus quickly. "Just us young ones, to praise and pray together and search the Scriptures." "All of you?" inquired the bailiff, looking round and catching sight of Onesimus. "And you too, Onesimus? Well, I'm glad to see you taking heed and fleeing from the wrath to come. You need to think of your sins, Onesimus, for they are great. Nightly I pray for you." "You need not waste your breath," muttered the boy rudely, but he set off with the others under Glaucus' eye. It was quite dark by now, and nobody noticed when he slipped behind an olive tree. He stood there rigidly until their voices died away, and then he was left alone with the gentle sounds of the night, the soft bleating of folded sheep, the rustling of grass, and, somewhere up near the canyons, the hoot of an owl. He crept back, his bare feet making no sound on the cool grass, and slipped into the stable. Already the courtyard was dark and silent, except for the snoring of one or two old slaves. The dogs lay with their heads on their paws, and he fondled them as he tiptoed out, so that none of them should take fright. They licked his hand and thumped their tails, for they all loved him, and he went back, curled up on some straw, rested his head against the horse's flank, and waited. It was hard work keeping awake for an hour, but at last he decided that all was safe. The old slaves would be deeply asleep by now, and the younger ones would not return till after midnight. Agile as a cat, he sprang for the window, unlatched it, and squeezed through. Seizing hold of the old vine stem, he swung himself across to the wall of Philemon's atrium, climbed over it, and then swung down. He fell soundlessly and waited for a moment, crouching, listening. Something rustled, and perhaps it was the warm night wind. He got up and moved on stealthily, feet towards the mistress' apartment. The curtain was drawn back, and a small rush light threw a black shadow on the wall. Someone was there. Who could it be? The house was locked, and the keys had been entrusted to Glaucus. Onesimus took a noiseless step forward, and peeped round the edge of the curtain. At the same moment the breeze fanned the rush, and the room was lit up. By the sudden light he could make out the figure of the bailiff crouched over a box, pulling out purple cloth and rich materials. The tiny flame flickered on gold bracelets and on the greedy, cunning face of the thief, and at that moment he glanced fearfully round and saw Onesimus. Glaucus gave a stifled scream and stuffed everything back in the box and slammed down the lid. The two stood facing each other in silence, breathing heavily. Both would have liked to have murdered the other, but they had no weapons and were too evenly matched to try without. The bailiff realized that he had only one slender chance, and he risked it boldly. "So," he remarked, "I see we are both in this, so let us come to an agreement. We would both rather keep a whole skin and our master's confidence. Neither of us wishes to be branded, so let us agree to keep silence. You forget what you have seen, and I will do the same. Come, let us go quietly. The gate is open." Onesimus stood, considering. Philemon, being a Christian, was unlikely to brand, and he himself had already survived several beatings and could survive a few more. He had little to lose, but the bailiff had everything. The rush flickered and died, and they were suddenly plunged into darkness. Onesimus had a wild idea of flying at Glaucus' throat, but decided against it. After all, a dead bailiff was no good to anyone, but a live bailiff in his power would be rather amusing and might even prove useful. It was a good bargain. Onesimus tiptoed out into the night and turned on his heel. And we will begin chapter 13 tomorrow. Daniel says no.
Wait, who wants me to read another chapter?
Oh, Daniel wants to vote to read another chapter.
I thought we learned this lesson.
Let's see what time it is. It is 9:17.
So I wanted to show you
Oh,
guys.
Kimmy's gonna show a picture.
I drew this. It's a sketch for a Minecraft castle.
I actually drew quite a bit of
I didn't see it.
thing.
Oh, wow.
How many pages?
Very fancy. I don't know. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 pages.
Wait, but before we do that, I would like to show you my picture because Kim showed you hers. So
You drew
this
Among Us, though.
this is mode 1 for my customized Beyblade. As you can see here, here's the top area. Then here's the light. I think this is the layer, but here's the metal and the energy disc, and there's the tip. And mode 2, if you look on this one, see how tiny that sword is? Look at mode 2. Look how big that sword is. And then there's a sword right there to where if it's at half HP, then it will connect with that sword and do a double sword strike. And then the tip is just huge. And I also drew some Among Us stuff. As you can see, this is... In Among Us, I'm always orange, so I made this. And I also made this. And then I also made this.
Alright.
Yay, lots of pictures. Leave your comments, put your likes, put your thumbs up, your hearts, whatever emoji that you're thinking of. I need everybody now to settle down
And hit the like button, subscribe.
we already said
hit
that.
the bell to never miss another video.
JJ,
You gotta make sure.
one time. Otherwise, they get.
They can only hit the bell once.
Yeah, one time they get
Once
more.
per channel. All right, so, oh, I see a heart. Oh, that's so nice. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to read chapter 13 unless anybody online is just burning us to quit. But if you are, then you can tune in later. I will be posting the YouTube video very shortly. I've been trying to do it before 10, so good luck. All right, this is chapter 13. Glaucus and Onesimus met in the morning as though nothing had happened, but there was a noticeable change in the bailiff's behavior. He treated the boy with a kind of frightened respect, and Onesimus rose when he liked and did what he pleased, and did not do what did not please him. In fact, he could have become very idle had he not loved the spring work on the farm, the hunting for the ewes in the ditches, and the feeding of motherless lambs. There was no better place than the pastures on these warm April evenings, when the flock wandered bleating toward the fold, and the daisies closed their petals, and the sun went down over Laodicea. "What are you dreaming of, boy?" the shepherd would ask him as he stood gazing westward across the valley, but the boy would only laugh and pick up a lamb and fondle it in his arms. But before the lambing was well over, a slave rode up to the farm on horseback and announced that Philemon and Apphia were already drawing near and were expecting him by nightfall. Onesimus did not question the slave about Archippus, because within a few hours he would see for himself. Ever since he had heard that there was a real possibility of healing, he had started to hope, and hope had grown to certainty, and he had not realized till today how shattered he would be if the miracle had not taken place, not so much for Archippus' sake as for his own. If Archippus were still lame, then never, as long as he lived, would he ever get rid of those feelings of guilt that sometimes tormented him on dark winter nights, when the wind howled round the farm and bowed the trees like clawing hands of some demon. Or is it bowed the trees? Put your comment. But tonight he would be freed of the consequences of his sin. Tonight Archippus would walk in, and the torment would be gone forever. He did little that day, and Glaucus, ordering round the other slaves, was almost fawning in his politeness and consideration of Onesimus. Too restless to settle to any real work, he wandered off toward the canyon to pick a bunch of spring flowers for Paschasia's apartment, for the child loved flowers and would be weary after her journey. It was his last hour of idle freedom. Tomorrow Philemon would set him to work in good earnest, and he would be glad of it. He was tired of just doing as he pleased, and then he remembered that this was freedom. Just to do as you pleased for the rest of your life, and to call no man your master. And he began to wonder for the first time in his life how much he would really enjoy it. He turned at the foot of the canyon, as he always did, to watch the evening sun sink behind Areopolis and bathe the walls and battlements in its last light. But as he did so, he noticed the small procession headed by the carriage, climbing the hill toward the upper plain of Colossae. Onesimus sped home. He could wait no longer to see what had happened. Would Archippus spring out of the carriage, or would he run the last lap, racing the horses, as he used to love to do on cool evenings? Perhaps tomorrow he would climb the canyons. Yet just now they were trundling rather warily up toward the farm, and there was no eager figure racing ahead. Probably he was waiting to give them all a surprise. And then the carriage drew up, with the tired slaves toiling behind, and Glaucus the bailiff was bowing and scraping and rolling out pompous salutations. Philemon climbed out and lifted down his son, while Pascasia handed him his crutch. But there was no trace of disappointment on the boy's bright face as he greeted the assembled household. Pale with fatigue from the cramped hours in the carriage, he was smiling, and there was a look on his face that seemed like an expression of triumph. Onesimus turned and fled. He had supper with his mother that night. It was good to have her home, and she told him as much as she could about the morning they had spent with Paul. They had all gone out to Miletus, south of Ephesus. For some reason I keep saying Ephesus, but it's Ephesus. Sorry about that. I'm trying to say Ephesians and Ephesus in the same, and so it doesn't work. They had all gone out to Miletus, south of Ephesus, to meet the ship, and he came ashore and talked to them on the beach. Being a slave, she had stood at the back and had heard but little. Pascasia had never been on a beach before and had kept wandering off to find shells, and Nerissa had hard work not to lose her. She did not really know what Paul had said, something about some wolves, she thought, but it was all very beautiful, and they had all knelt down in the end, and he had blessed them. Most people had wept because, with the dangers and persecutions he was facing, it was unlikely they would ever see him again, but Nerissa had not wept. To go to Christ and to rest forever in his home seemed to her the most wonderful thing that could ever happen to anyone. Her only fear was that her boy might not be there with her. She was tired and slept eerily, but Onesimus lay awake till the 4th watch, tossing and cursing to himself. He felt that he had been cheated. The dark shadow of his guilt would rest upon him forever now, and he wondered what Irene would say if she knew, but she must never know. There would always be a corner of his heart he could not show her. There would never be perfect truth between them. For 3 days he managed to avoid meeting Archippus alone or speaking to him except for an embarrassed greeting, and he would have been surprised if he had known how much pain he was causing his young master. But on the 4th morning he was told to bring a sack of flour from the granary to the house, and bowed under the weight of it, he lurched round the corner, not seeing where he was going. "Stop, Onesimus! I can't get out of the way!" Archippus stood in the path, leaning heavily on his crutch, but he had called out too late. The top-heavy sack lunged forward, and Onesimus with it, and Archippus went flying. The sack fell on the ground, and the slave stood stock-still, aghast, waiting for an explosion of rage. But it never came. Archippus' face was twisted with pain, but he recovered himself quickly and held out his hand. "Please, help me up, Onesimus," he said quietly. "It's a good thing I fell on top of that heap of straw. Hand me my crutch. It's all right. You need not look so frightened. It was not your fault. I am not really hurt." Onesimus gaped at him, standing there pale and shaken from his fall, but completely in control of himself, and a sudden flood of compassion, remorse, and admiration welled up in his heart. He was so overcome that he sat down on the flour sack and stared at Archippus as though he had never seen him before in his life. "Master," he said slowly, his embarrassment forgotten, "I am really sorry you were not healed. What happened? I suppose all those miracles people talk about were just fakes." Archippus lowered himself beside him with some difficulty, his pain forgotten. He had so longed for this moment, but now that it had come, he felt unable to explain. Besides, sitting on a flour sack in the public courtyard was hardly the setting he had imagined. How could he make Onesimus see what he had seen? How could he, an unenlightened heart, understand? How ridiculous it would sound. His slave would probably end up by despising him more than ever. No, they were not fakes. They were all true, and far more than we ever heard about. He hesitated, and then plunged boldly on. Paul talked to us all on that seashore. He talked about the ministry he had received of the Lord Jesus, and about caring for the church. He called it the flock of God. "Never mind about the church, master," interrupted Onesimus. "They'll be out to look for this sack of flour. Tell me about the miracle, or rather the lack of it." "I went forward and spoke to Paul when it was over," went on Archippus steadily. "We walked along the beach a little way, and we sat on a rock and talked. I asked him to lay his hands on me and heal me so that I could go with my father and Master Epaphras and preach the gospel all over Phrygia, and he said he did not think that was the ministry God had given me. He thought I was meant to stay and tend the church here in Colossae, like a shepherd feeds the sheep and guards them from wolves without, and I did not need to walk far for that. He said that the miracles were given as signs, but I did not need a sign. I must learn to walk by faith, and then he told me what had happened to him." Someone with a loud voice inside the house began heaping abuse upon slaves who went to sleep in granaries. Neither boy took the slightest notice. "He has a sickness he seldom talks about," went on Archippus, "and he is often in pain. 3 times he prayed for healing, and the 3rd time the Lord himself spoke to him. He said, 'My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness.' And do you know, Onesimus, ever since then, he has been glad about his illness and weakness." "Glad? Whatever for? You looked glad too, master, when you were lifted out of that carriage. You Christians are strange people. I just cannot understand you. Why were you glad that day when you came home as lame as you went?" "Because our weakness makes us lean so hard on his strength. Before I was lame, I was so proud and strong, I thought I could do anything. Now I am lame. I know I can do nothing. My weakness leads me back and back to him, and I love him as a thirsty man loves the fountain and a cold man loves the fire. Only you cannot understand till you love him." "And you are content?" "Not only content, I'm glad." There was a light in his master's eyes that Onesimus had never seen before. He still did not understand, but he knew that Archippus had grown to patient, disciplined manhood, and in spite of his lameness, Onesimus would never despise him again. For the first time in his life, he gazed at him with respect. "May the curses of all the gods descend upon you, idle slave," shouted the cook. Sorry, that's a different person, and that person's not happy. "May the curses of all the gods descend upon you, idle slave,"
Oh my god.
shouted the cook, flinging open the door of the house suddenly and throwing a bone which caught Onesimus full on the ear. "Am I to wait until—" Then he caught sight of the young master and retreated hastily, although no doubt he intended to finish his sentence in the kitchen. Onesimus rose, helped Archippus to his feet, shouldered the sack, and lurched ahead to get what he deserved from the cook. But Archippus struggled on over the rough ground till he found an outcrop of rock and sat down to rest. The spring sunshine warmed him. The golden faces of the dandelions smiled up at him. It seemed as though every bird in the canyon was singing to his happy heart. He looked out across the valley where his feet would never travel, to the mountains he would never climb, and he praised God. He had won at last. Through all the years when he had sought so hard to impress Onesimus with his physical strength and beauty, his power and importance, his slave had hated and despised him. Now his pride of life broken, a weak cripple with nothing left with which to impress, he had won his slave's allegiance. Perhaps in time he might even win his friendship. That's the end of chapter 13, and that is where we will stop for tonight. Hope you're enjoying this story. I think that this is going to be our shortest live stream story that we've had so far, because we only have that far left in the book. We're a little more than halfway through. So, tell me what you think is going to happen.
I know exactly
Without-
what's gonna
Okay, Kimberly knows exactly what's going to happen, so don't tell me what you think is going to happen if you've read the story before or if you're reading ahead in the Bible timeline, because there obviously is a Bible timeline that might or might not coincide with the story, and I can't wait to get to it.
And there's even a book in the Bible called Philemon.
Shh. Kimberly.
It's so tiny.
Yeah.
That is such a big spoiler.
All right, so
Such a spoiler.
Kimberly doesn't know the meaning of no spoilers. So just if you heard what she said,
Jedi mind
erase
trick.
it from your mind.
Solomon!
All right, so we are going to continue tomorrow. And once again, I hope you're enjoying the story. My kids are down there whispering on the floor, so they're not able to say goodnight to you.
Go say goodnight.
Kimberly is off in the other room, so she can't say goodnight to you. And
JJ and Daniel, I told you to quit. Whatever you're doing.
Good night.
you can see the very tip of her eyelashes.
Good night.
Say goodnight.
Didn't hear. Oh, Granny Bear didn't hear.
Say good night.
Book in the Bible. There is a book in the Bible called
Whatever
Habakkuk.
you're doing is distracting and you need to not.
There is a book in the Bible called
Good
Amos.
night.
There's a book in the Bible called John the Baptist.
No, there's not. But there is one called John. There is a book in the Bible called Genesis.
Revelation.
Yep, Revelation. That's right.
John 1, John 2, John 3.
You mean 1 John, 2 John, 3 John?
What he said.
Yeah, what he said. There's also
There's a book in the
Luke.
There's a book in the Bible called Hebrews, which ironically is not in the Hebrew Bible, but in the Greek Bible.
There's also Matthew, Mark, Luke, John.
All right. So now that we've talked about several of the books of the Bible, good night.